I am so happy to welcome to the show today the former WWE head writer and acknowledged as the former one-time seventh most powerful person in WWE, the senior VP of development at Seven Bucks Productions, Brian Gewirtz. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Phil, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your fashion choice, wearing a nice long sleeve, it looks like, pullover.
Polo.
Oh, no, short sleeve.
Yeah,
Okay,
I buttoned the top button, though. So
yeah, looks good. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. They may never lose again, which by the time this comes out on Monday, I might eat those words, but we'll see. So we'll start off with your book, which comes out on Tuesday. There's Just One Problem. Was there a moment in your journey where you recognized, like, wow, this would make a great book? What made you decide to write this?
You know, it was something that I had in the back of my mind as far as wanting to parlay the WWE experience into something. You know, when I first started, I had designs on like, oh, well, maybe this will, maybe this I could use this as far as developing a sitcom one day, because that was initially where the world that I had come in from, the writing on sitcoms and stuff. And then, ultimately when the pandemic hit in 2020, I found myself with like a lot of, as we all did, a lot of time in our homes, in our apartments, and a lot of time to think and really, ponder all of life. And that was like, especially, again, just to take your mind off of everything that was going on. I had talked with Dwayne Johnson, Danny Garcia, the heads of Seven Bucks, and said, hey, what would you guys think about this if I kind of put pen to paper? Because, over the years, you have a lot of stories, you accumulate a lot of stories. I've always said, if you don't have enough material to write a book after 16 years in WWE, then you might be doing something wrong. So that was something that, it really, and by the way, seeing like people like Bruce Pritchard, who I had worked with, who ultimately, became a really successful podcaster, basically just telling stories that I had heard him tell, backstage at WWE for a long time. I was like, you know what? I think now, especially now too, with WWE and the world of wrestling in general, opening up a lot more, and there's a lot more behind the scenes content, podcasts, documentaries, what have you, than ever been before, probably in the history of the business, especially when it comes to WWE specifically. It just all seemed like the right time in terms of having time and being the right time too.
And you seem to pull back the curtain in a very respectful way. I think a lot of books, sometimes in wrestling, people expect like all the dirt and everything you're possible. Everybody's going to get knocked and everything like that. But, it's really your journey within that realm and you getting used to it. And I thought that approach, I think fans would probably really like too.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. I tried to kind of take my cues from like Mick Foley's books and Chris Jericho's books, where it's certainly none of their books that they've written, and they've written several, can be kind of considered just like a, everything presented on a nice little platter with rose-colored glasses or anything like that. They were truthful, and they were entertaining, and they were self-deprecating. And I just thought I couldn't wait for a new one to come out. I always thought they were really good. And the fact is, WWE, wrestling in general, I don't really have dirty laundry. There might be a couple of stains, some creases, some things that need ironing. But there's really like nothing, like truly, there was no like, I'd never had like a Heisenberg moment after I left where I'm like, I need to burn this all down. We're still, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, he still, has WWE obviously in his DNA. He goes back and forth. I go with him when he does. And we're working, at Seven Bucks, we're working with WWE on a number of projects too, including Young Rock. So it just seemed like there wasn't any reason to, for some people that works and they have those kind of stories to tell and it fits their, style and everything. For me, I think it could be just as fascinating to just have something that's very truthful and not like, slanted or rose-colored glasses or anything, but really just entertaining. And that was like really my main focus.
So the role of the creative writer in wrestling seems to be an important yet completely misunderstood role to the general public and possibly even to a lot of the people within wrestling too. What to you is the most vital part of the role of a creative writer within pro wrestling?
Well, first of all, there's the necessity of it, at least when it comes to WWE. Every company is different. You know, AEW, they might have a very different approach as it relates to writers and stuff like that, meaning they might not even have any, as far as I know. But, you know, in WWE, there's like, you have the just the ticking clock every single week of a show that needs to be live on Monday, and now a show that needs to be live on Friday, and a pay-per-view that's live on either Saturday or Sunday, and a ton of characters, i.e. a ton of wrestlers, and you need storylines that are compelling and ones that like are, you know, in some respects grounded and relatable, in other respects, you know, larger than life and like the real, you know, reason why you have a television show. And somebody's got to kind of put all those together and kind of oversee it and propose stuff and create stuff. You know, and it's kind of, you know, that's kind of where I know like the wrestling writers has been, you know, poo-pooed in the sense of like, well, for the first century plus of wrestling, you didn't need wrestling writers and it did just fine. And that's true. But like, I don't think wrestling's ever been presented, at least in WWE, you know, 90s and beyond, as this 2 to 4 to 8 hours of primetime television every single week that needs to be accounted for. You know, but in terms of the most vital aspect, to me, the most vital is establishing relationships with the wrestlers themselves and gaining trust and, you know, kind of a nice back and forth flow as far as sharing ideas. Because at the end of the day, I found the most success I've ever had was collaborating with wrestlers, working with them, not dictating to them, and, you know, seeing what we can get and putting it up on the air.
It always seemed to me, too, that it's more important to have maybe the long-term planning as much as you can within something like WWE rather than the heavy scripting at all times. But then again, I'm a fan and you were actually there. So do you think that it's more the role of the writer is better for the kind of the overarching kind of thing with the characters?
Yes, I do. And I've always felt like the role of the writer in WWE is essentially to act as a, you know, to assist the wrestlers and talent. Again, not to dictate to them, because they know their characters better than anyone. And if they don't know their characters better than anyone, it's good to have a sounding board and someone to collaborate with to, you know, see what works. What if we tried this? What if we didn't try this? So yes, to long-term storylines, sometimes it's out of your hand. You know, there's so many variables when it comes to long-term storylines, as far as, you know, the obvious ones of people getting injured on live events and everything. You know, you change one thing, it's a domino effect and everything else changes. And sometimes it's crowd reaction, because you really do need to listen to the crowd. And sometimes that could dictate whether or not, you know, you move forward with an angle or storyline or not. But as far as, you know, scripting versus unscripting, because that's a very, very heavily talked about and sometimes misunderstood aspect of the WWE job. I don't think there's one writer that I've ever worked with who's currently there now who prefers, we don't need, the wrestler doesn't need to worry about it. I've got this. I'm going to script it, and you need to say it word for word. Where that kind of came from, I think, is there was a, you know, tendency when the company WWE went public, right. And when you know, there was a very kind of, you know, the company went PG rating, and it was very sensitive to advertisers and sponsors. Not that it isn't now, but especially then, to make sure that there's not going to be anything that's said on the air that wasn't already known of and approved of. And you had that fine line of like, you know, the being able to at least, you know, in the case of Vince, having his trust to go out there and work with the talent and have them, you know, do a promo, hopefully with them contributing to it heavily, with a lot of their input. And also that fine line of like, you know, the boss wanting to know what is being said on his television show and needing to approve it, especially if it's not a talent that he's all that, you know, worked closely with or familiar with, if it's a new talent or something. So yeah, it's one of those things. And I think, I mean, again, I haven't worked there full time in 7 years, but from what I understand, I think the reins have loosened a little bit. And you have hopefully now like this nice balance of like trust. People can go out, they know, they trust the talent and the writer, that they know nothing's going to be said that's going to like get anyone to trouble with the sponsors or anything like that. You're not going to just drop language that shouldn't be used just to get a cheap pop or anything like that. And if you do, maybe that's one thing you check on ahead of time and make sure that it's okay to do. But yeah, I mean, I never truly enjoyed the idea of handing someone a script and saying, go do it. Some wrestlers actually prefer that, not many, but some have like a lot to get in their heads as far as their matches and everything else that's going on, and be like, please ease my burden, put something together. Kurt Angle was like that when he first started. But again, for the most part, collaboration, I think, is the best.
And Kurt Angle specifically just seemed like such a good character to collaborate with. All of the stuff that he did right off the bat was just so excellent.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kurt is awesome. He's an awesome human being. He was awesome to collaborate with because it's like no matter how ridiculous a scenario you would give to him, and you would think, especially when it came to working with me, you would think an Olympic gold medalist would have some sort of standards. But he really didn't, as far as like willing to try and do anything. Like, we want you to like look like a complete fool. Okay, great. We want you. You're in a main event, level WrestleMania. I almost said feud. Angle with Shawn Michaels. What do you think about singing a parody of his theme song with Sherry Martel? You're like, great. What do you think about getting into a rap battle with John Cena and giving him a hug and saying that's basic hugonomics? Perfect. Like, what do you think of, losing a loser gets his head shaved match and putting on this ridiculous wig with a, wrestling, protective gear or what have you? Is like, sign me up. He was just like a writer's dream, really, and anyone's dream to. And on top of that, he's this like phenomenon in the ring, who is like just has these relatively short experience in the pro wrestling business, but took to it like nobody else.
And I will say, for anybody listening, if you have not ever seen Sexy Kurt, you should take a look at that, because it's one of the funniest things of all time to see him and Sensational Sherry in there doing their thing.
I'm very proud. I don't have many songwriting credits to my name, but I do have that one.
It's like a co-writing credit with Jimmy Hart.
Yeah, that's true.
If anyone might have a perspective for the inner workings of WWE, it's you. As the company moves now from Vince McMahon to Stephanie McMahon and Paul Levesque, all people you've worked with a ton, how do you see things changing just from a creative aspect? You kind of alluded to a little bit with kind of maybe loosening the reins a little bit. I think there's already been some noticeable changes in terms of who's featured and some of the formatting things and things like that. But what do you think that fans will expect and notice about kind of who's in charge of the creative now?
Well, one of the things, that I found to be kind of difficult, in my time writing, was just the fact that like Vince, in charge of creative, was also in charge of everything. And that limited the amount of time he had. And time is essential, especially when you're putting together hours upon hours of television. So when you would finally get to meet with him, usually you definitely needed to cover the main event stuff and the opening stuff in the middle of the show and everything. And oftentimes, you didn't have the time to do to give the TLC to the quote unquote, mid card and lower card angles and stuff like that. And a lot of that was done on the fly at television. And sometimes it was successful and sometimes it wasn't. And, that was because he had so many responsibilities as CEO, and there were aspects of the company that, like, when I finally, I never thought about before I worked there, but, between board meetings and sales and merchandise and negotiating, rights fees and everything flowed through him. So creative, which in my opinion should have, taken a big chunk of time, often out of necessity would take just, much smaller amount of time. With Triple H, and again, not, that Paul doesn't have other responsibilities in addition to creative, him doing head of talent relations and everything else. But I see a lot more time that he could hopefully be devoted to WWE, the creative and both shows. So just that alone, the fact that you'll have hopefully more time to discuss and pitch creative and talk about more characters and talk about, the intricacies of backstories and where potentially you're going down the road. Time is so huge when you're trying to write these things. And Vince had limited time with it. Hopefully Paul has more. But I think that's going to be such an advantage that nobody really talks about. The fact that you can now truly talk about more than just the top 2 or 3 storylines.
Yeah, it's very interesting. What was the most important thing that Vince McMahon brought to the creative realm of wrestling? You speak about your relationship with him in the book, and I think I've probably heard more takes on Vince McMahon than maybe anybody in wrestling. So what really did he bring to the table on a daily basis?
The best thing I would say about Vince is you knew who the boss was, and the buck stopped with him, and he would take ownership of any decision that he made. There was no second guessing of maybe if this person doesn't like it, then this person will like it. And it's like, no, if Vince likes it, it will go in. If he doesn't, then it won't. And he was also, a strong proponent of leadership by example. That's one of the things he always tried to, impart on all of us. For me as a head writer to the writing team. And he owned that. He would, if there was something, that the talent would be kind of had question marks, he'd be great. Let me do it out in the ring in front of everybody. And I'll show you exactly what you'll be doing. I'm not going to, one of his famous quotes was, I'll never make someone do something that I wouldn't do myself. And he talked the talk and walked the walk. It's hard to really, it's difficult to argue with the boss in general, as far as, trying to, not respect his ultimate final say and opinion. But when you're the first one showing up at work and the last one leaving and going to every show and doing all the things, both as an on-camera talent and behind the scenes that, really a CEO and a multi-millionaire / billionaire really doesn't have to do, but does anyway because they're so passionate about it. That permeates on down. You're like, man, if Vince is showing up to every show, if he's so invested, in all these things, I got to be up at that level, or at least try to.
So you work for the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny Garcia's company, $7 Entertainment now. I told a couple of my friends, hey, if you have any messages for The Rock, I could be a very bizarre go-between for you today. And the only one I got really was, hey, let him know that Skyscraper was an overlooked classic and that his leading women are always age appropriate. And I was like, gee, thanks. But kidding aside, what is it like to work for them?
It's to work with, Dwayne and Danny Garcia, Hiram Garcia, the president of $7. It's really, a lot of lessons from WWE has kind of permeated to $7 as well. And that is just between Vince, Dwayne, and Danny, the work ethics are unparalleled. There is no, I'll just sit back and, hopefully it will work out well. It's like if their name is on something, whether it's a television show, a movie, a business venture, they are going to be full knees deep in it on multiple aspects of it too. So, and again, that kind of that permeates on down. That is, the leadership by example thing. It's real because you see them working so hard and you're kind of inspired to do, you don't want to let anybody down, but you also want to be up at that level or as close to it as you can. So yeah, I would say that's one of the things. And the other thing is but the reason why I worked so well with Dwayne at the beginning was he had this attitude of I don't really know this guy when I first met him, but prove to me what you got. And if what you got is good, then yeah, let's work together. And if what you got isn't good, then I'll be just fine regardless. So that approach, really helped me because he didn't have to do that when I started at WWE. He could have said, well, I'm The Rock. I don't know who you are. I don't need to work with you. I'm a WrestleMania main eventer, which he was. I'm over. But instead, he like said, yeah, let's show me what you got. And that approach really, applies to certainly television development and people, any idea. It doesn't necessarily have to matter where it comes from or who pitches it. If it's a good idea and we're all passionate about it, let's see it through. And if there's like a television show that like one of us on the team feels passionate about, even if it's not something that necessarily directly, tied to Dwayne or Danny or anyone, they'll give us that space to go forward and push it forward and see it to the end. Because it's like at the bottom line is, the end result is really all that matters, and making sure it's good and fans embrace it and audience first and all of those things. But, there's a lot of things that you could say, well, The Rock didn't have to do that. But he does that because he's so invested in wanting to make sure that every project that he's associated with, has the work that's put into it. Some are going to be successful, some might not be, but it will never be because of a lack of hard work.
Are you working on this new territories project that they have with Vice coming up also?
Oh yeah. I've been, we've been cultivating that, and again, that started, the origins of that project were through a Rock Instagram post. Just the fact that as a wrestling fan, he was a fan of Dark Side of the Ring, and he posted about a couple episodes. And again, it's like, you have 300+ million followers on Instagram. That's like a kind of a big deal when you post something on your channel. So, I was like, hey, I like that show too. Let me set a meeting with Evan and Jason, the creators of that show, and see what we can all collaborate on and come up with. And, obviously Dwayne being third generation, he has a ton of stories about his father and his grandfather. And a lot of that we incorporate into Young Rock, but there's plenty of, territories, as and a ton of wrestlers and a ton of stories, that are beyond the Young Rock sphere. So we got together, we proposed the show. We got to work with, Chavo Guerrero, who works on Young Rock, collaborated with him too. And this is like something like we're really, really excited about, because it's a very unfiltered, as though, everything on Vice TV is, look, but we didn't want to focus on necessarily the negative and the dark, because Dark Side already did that. Yeah. There'll be some crossover for sure, but we want to really focus on the crazy, incredible, like this can't be true, but it is, stories of the territories from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, the truth is always the most interesting story to me when it comes to most of wrestling territories. So The Rock versus John Cena, the two times that it happened, seems to be your WrestleMania moments, as they like to say. Without giving too much of the book away, what was it like working with those two against one another? And they're both just good at basically everything, right? Yeah.
No, that was a journey to work on, that angle for 3 years with both of them, because that really, you never truly know how something is going to go. Obviously, Rock vs. Cena on paper is box office, and in reality was box office. But the fact of the matter is they weren't on the same page at the beginning, and there was real life animosity between them that, obviously has since dissipated, and they're really good friends now. But at the time, it was heated, and I was literally in the middle of them, in rooms and stuff like that, trying to be like, if you guys just, got to know each other, you'd be such great friends. And it was, it had exceeded a point, because the angle, started not in a wrestling ring or in a wrestling, space. It started with an interview John had done with a paper in the UK, where he was kind of blunt about his opinion in terms of how, Dwayne was away from WWE. He says he loved it, but he doesn't come back, and that kind of thing. Whatever the language he used, it definitely rubbed Dwayne the wrong way. And so from the very start, it was, there was some, even though you show up to the arena and shake hands and how you doing and everything, there was some simmering tension from the very beginning. And that could be good. I mean, in some ways it was good for the angle and for the storyline and everything, but it made my job to try to like get them on the same page and, make sure Vince was happy, at the highest level. There's nothing higher level in WWE than the main event of WrestleMania. The only thing higher than that is 2 main events of WrestleMania, and really 3 when you consider, Rock hosting the show,
Right.
in the first time. So yeah, that was, and that's why it takes up a whole chapter, because that was, very touch and go there for a second, as far as, are we going to bend but not break? And is this whole angle going to come, spiraling out of control to the point where they don't like each other? That could turn into not trusting each other. If they don't trust each other, then the match is going to suffer. So, I'm very glad with the way it ended up, minus, Rock hurting himself at the Meadowlands and needing like surgery afterwards. Not so much that part, but from a relationship standpoint and from a, personal standpoint, the fact that, John and Dwayne and myself, to a lesser extent, are all, on the same page and are cool with each other, and to see John's success in Hollywood and to see kind of his career mirror Dwayne's, as far as, yes, like he'll always be a part of WWE. He'll come back occasionally, but now he's starring in movies and television shows, and, he understands. And John's the first one to say, I understand now. I get it. I get what Rock was doing back then. So yeah, it all turned out well in the end, but it was a little, by little, I mean a lot, nerve-wracking when it happened.
So easily one of the kindest people I've ever met doing media and interviews over the years, who I got to cross paths with a few times, was Roddy Piper. And in the book, you discuss your creative and personal relationship with Hot Rod. What can you share with us about your time with Piper today?
Yeah, that was really, I often wasn't nervous when working at WWE for a variety of reasons. But working with Roddy made me nervous, at least at first, because he was my hero. I literally had a poster having adorned over my bed of heel Roddy, pointing at himself, smiling. And I really didn't want to screw this up. And I also knew going in that Roddy isn't necessarily a fan of wrestling writers. He's as old school as they come. Every promo you saw, in WWF in the 80s and before that, and in Los Angeles and Mexico and Portland and everywhere else he went, came from him and him alone. So I really was walking on eggshells. I mean, I have this nearby. This was from my parents' basement. I just rescued it. This is what I had growing up, the giant Roddy doll, in addition to the smaller ones. And so, yeah, I was really relieved. I mean, Bruce Pritchard helped me out a great deal. Bruce Pritchard, another member of the creative team who had been around for a long time and was friends with Roddy. He kind of put in a good word for me before Roddy made his, reemergence in WWE in 2003 at WrestleMania 19. So that broke the tension a little bit, but then you had to actually write for him. And that was very intense because, at the same time, as a writer, first of all, you don't want to dictate to Roddy, knowing his history and knowing, how he works. At the same time, Vince wants it a certain way and wants to know especially what Roddy's going to say out there. And you also, you don't want to have Roddy be upset at you. You don't want to have your childhood hero all of a sudden can't stand the sight of you and doesn't want to work with you. But Roddy, yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but like you had alluded to, he was so warm and so giving and so hey kid, what do you got? What do you got today? And yeah, it was a process sometimes as far as working on the promo with him. There were times where, I was in charge of assigning writers to specific promo segments and specific interviews. And I would take myself off of the Roddy ones because I didn't want to risk somehow upsetting him or making him mad. But, that was maybe half the time. The other half, I did work with him. I worked with him on his first Piper's Pit back with Vince. I worked with him with a promo with Cena that was really, really well done. One, I think, with Jericho too. And it was so thrilling to really be able, they say don't meet your heroes. I met mine, and it worked out better than anything I could have possibly imagined.
Yeah, my favorite thing with Roddy, whenever I'd see him, he used to do some of the cards for Northeast Wrestling up in this kind of area. And anytime he did a meet and greet, I can't tell you the number of times I saw him ask fans for their phone so he could call their parents and tell them how great their kids were. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things I've seen. I saw him do it a couple of times, and I was just like, this guy gets it. Like, he just does.
No, totally.
So we're going to move to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 relatively quick questions and your answers. So the first one, it's a 2-part question, though. Mm-hmm. Who was on your Raw guest host Mount Rushmore? And who was on the opposite end of that, which I decided to call Mount Flushmore because I couldn't come up with anything else.
So Mount Rushmore, from a personal standpoint, and I think mostly received well shows. Bob Barker, he's in the Washington spot. I thought Shaquille O'Neal did an awesome job. It took it very seriously. He was great. Mike Tyson's return was super cool too. And it was, I tell a story about it in the book because it didn't go off as seamless as some of the other guest host segments. Right. And I would put Ken Jeong in there as well. Now, Ken's show, let's just be honest, was not very well received. That was the one with Jeremy Piven early, where Jeremy Piven, infamously called SummerSlam Summerfest.
That's right.
And received the wrath of many, many fans. And Ken was there as his hype man. But he's such a huge fan of WWE and wrestling in general. The first time, I met him backstage at WWE, he was like, "Did you work on the Kurt Angle promo where he mentions the only good things about Canadians are Michael J. Fox and maple syrup?" Like, yeah, I did. He's like, "I love that promo." So yeah, Ken put himself, he really put himself out there as far as willing to be hated, which is, sometimes, when the guest host would come in, easier said than done, because they're all up for it. Sometimes their publicists are like, yeah, maybe having an arena, 20,000 people booing you isn't the greatest thing in the world to promote this movie. But Ken was a trooper. And of course, infamously, John Cena tossed him out of the ring. We rehearsed it. A whole bunch of wrestlers were there to catch him. And he still banged his head on the back of the, the steel metal entrance anyway. And he's a doctor. So he helped himself get stitched up. And as we're pacing outside, I really didn't know what his reaction was going to be. Is he going to be angry? Is he going to threaten to sue us all? And instead, he just came out all smiles and was like, "That was incredible," and starts hugging everybody, and really took it as a badge of honor. So I really, and I'm friends with Ken today. I really enjoyed being able to work with him on that. And on the Flushmore side,
yeah.
Look, I don't want to bury specific people or anything. There's let me just say this. There's a contingency, and it when you see it. And I've kind of, I was asked this question. Jericho and I said our number one answer at the same time, and it was Al Sharpton. Now, it wasn't, anything really against Al Sharpton, but it was the position we put Al Sharpton in. And in some respects, Joey Logano and Kyle Busch, I think, and a couple other people in that space of they are not particularly big fans of WWE. They don't particularly know anybody who's on the show. They may not even really want to be there, but they're going there to either promote or get their names out there and that type of thing. And all those shows, and there were probably a fair percentage of those shows where it was well, this person knows nothing about WWE, but they want to promote their project, so we're going to have them on. I think that was one of the pitfalls of the guest host era that lasted over a year. It really should have lasted for about a month or two, if that, where you could tell the people who were there just to, very, very talented people in their respective fields, but in the WWE space, it was the fans didn't want to have anything to do with them. They really didn't want to have anything to do with the show. And when you have that combination, it just leads to ugliness and leads to Like, when can we stop this era, please?
I would love for anybody listening to this too, if anybody can produce me a Mount Rushmore graphic of Bob Barker, Shaq, Mike Tyson, and Dr. Ken, that would be perfect, because I can't think of 4 more interesting people to get on a Mount Rushmore.
Oh my God, I put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. So next question. This New York Mets season, is it the best one you've seen in your lifetime outside of maybe 86?
Yeah, outside of 86. I mean, I was lucky. I was 13 years old when the 86 Mets happened. They were the theme of my bar mitzvah that year. I had like foam statues of Gooden and Strawberry, Hernandez, Carter, McDowell, Dykstra, like all of them. It was like, and every member of the family, fixed to the TV screen. And you really haven't had that since. You had, a really great 2006 season that, unfortunately ended prematurely. And then, even the World Series teams since then in 2000 and 2015, there was this sense of like, wow, suddenly the Mets are in the World Series. How did this happen? Whereas with this team, it's like, that's kind of the expectation right now. It's so surreal. And I'm also a Bills fan. So the Mets and Bills being good at the same time is a concept that is completely like, my DNA doesn't know how to handle this. It's very surreal, and I'm just going along for the ride. And I'm really, really glad that Young Rock this season is shooting in Memphis as opposed to Australia. Because if they make the World Series, it's just a 3-hour flight from Memphis to LaGuardia.
Maybe I'll see you there if they get there.
Yeah,
I'm Islanders and Mets, so I'm on the same page with you. My teams are very early.
I'm not a huge hockey fan, but if I have to root for a hockey team, I grew up on Long Island,
Same.
Of course. Yeah.
And finally, what do you think is the best thing you ever wrote in WWE, and what also do you think is the best thing you've seen in WWE that you didn't write?
Okay, interesting. I've pondered this. From a long-term angle standpoint, I always cite the Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels long-term storyline. Because it's not. I was friends with Chris. I was not friends with Shawn initially. And it was I prided myself on the fact that it was a very serious storyline. It wasn't, there wasn't a lot of comedy infused in it, if at all. And we crafted that thing, and the 3 of us would sit down, and Michael Hayes would join us. And we'd really, really give it the attention to detail and, the respect the storyline deserved. And made sure it was logical. And, you had that dynamic, which I love, which is the heel who is clearly in the right, like Chris Jericho was. He was calling out all of Shawn's hypocrisies, but because Shawn was Shawn and was the babyface in the storyline, as fans, you forgave him. And you were like, all right, Chris, just calm down. This isn't even any of your business. And then it involved Shawn's wife, and it got extremely personal. And again, extended well beyond, especially because it wasn't intended to be anything more than maybe a Raw or 2. The fact that we got 8 months out of it, I put a lot of pride in that. And from a special, specifically a favorite promo, probably the most fun I ever had was working with Dwayne and The Rock on The Rock concerts. And especially when he's heel Rock, and we're able to heel on the poor denizens of Sacramento that first time. Later too with John Cena, Rock and I were able to, come up with the lyrics of the first song sung to the tune of Kansas City. Later, Hiram Garcia, president of $7, he'd join us, and we'd just stay up all night in his hotel, just throwing out lyrics that are well beyond the realms of good taste and allowable on television. We get those out of our system. But then we'd, really, just have a ton of fun just producing them. And the fans, most importantly, were always into it and always enjoyed it. And, those, like, I could go on YouTube and watch those anytime.
And then the best thing that you, that you've seen in WWE that you didn't write?
The best thing that I've seen in WWE that I didn't write. I don't know. 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 there's
I guess technically it's really just what's your favorite thing that you liked.
Yeah, no, there's a ton.
Yeah.
I gotta say, and again, I write it about in the book, like my WWE awakening. When I first realized this stuff is incredible, was running into my parents' room as an 11-year-old when the War to Settle the Score on MTV took place, and it was the first time I ever saw a ref bump.
Wow.
Think about that. We take those for granted now, but you're a kid and you see like the referee typically doesn't get knocked out in football and basketball, and and if it does, the action stops. You need to check on them. It doesn't continue, and Mr. T doesn't get out of the Madison Square Garden and jump up on the apron to protect Cyndi Lauper as Piper and Orndorff are like slowly stalking her, and Hogan coming back, and the WrestleMania 1 was a success for a reason, and that angle on MTV blew my 11-year-old mind out of the water. And I remember running into my parents, giving them color commentary. They have no idea what I'm talking about or what I'm watching. I'm talking a mile a minute, but as a kid, and as the thing that kind of prompted this fandom that would eventually become a profession and career, that's really that thing that in execution, when you look at it, is so simple. It's a ref bump. It's heels threatening, the celebrity coming out, and then the babyface making the big comeback and a big pull apart. There's no monster trucks. There's no outside what have you, like special effect, anything like that. That really just blew my mind away, and I always remember it.
Well, the book is There's Just One Problem. It's available now on pre-order, and it comes out on Tuesday. Brian Gewirtz, thank you so much for joining me today on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. I have been looking forward to this for so long, and then just getting it delayed again just made it even better. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hopefully it didn't disappoint. Hopefully, we could text each other at Citi Field sometime in October, late in the playoffs, if not the World Series.
That sounds great to me.